Hello out there and welcome back. Today we're coming to you with a replay of a webinar that we held for our clients where we were joined by Nathan Spaling and Dr. Richard Shulman from the Capacity Clinic, an independent firm with the mission of helping Canadians make incapacity situations more predictable. They provide assessments of decision-making capacity, they do clinical consultations, and they create educational content for Canadians. We have a great deal of respect for the work that the Capacity Clinic does, filling what we think is a major gap in financial literacy. We hope you enjoy. So the topic that we're going to discuss today is incapacity. It's not necessarily one of the most fun topics that we deal with as professionals, but it might be one of the most overlooked topics. I think if you're trying to get a handle on your finances and planning out your life, there are libraries of books that you can read on retirement planning, estate planning, tax planning, and really any kind of financial planning. But it turns out that if you want to learn about how to plan for the case that you become incapacitated and you can't make your own decisions, it's not so easy to read up on things. And that's really where the Capacity Clinic comes in. The Capacity Clinic was founded by Nathan Spaling, who's on the line with us here today. And its mission is really to give education and support to substitute decision makers, to people who have substitute decision makers, and to professionals who deal with clients that have substitute decision makers. And really to give them, first of all, education, and second of all, some tools and resources so that we can set up a situation where we get some control back in a time in your life where you might be the most vulnerable. So Nathan is a lawyer by trade, and he's the founder of the two organizations that you see on your screen here, Capacity Clinic and the POA Registry. You can check them out on Google if you want to learn more, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about them as we go through the presentation. And our guest speaker today is Dr. Richard Shulman, who is the medical director of the Capacity Clinic. He's a geriatric psychiatrist by profession, and he gets involved in capacity assessments and in building a lot of the educational material that the Capacity Clinic offers. So Dr. Shulman, thank you so much for joining us. I think maybe we'll kick it off and just talk a little bit about what is a substitute decision maker. What is it? Why do we need one? And how can they help?
All right, Dr. Shulman, if you wanted to pass the mic to me, I'll maybe comment on this first. You're on mute, though, just in case you didn't know you were on mute. But thank you so much, Andrew, for having us. This is amazing to be here, and really cool opportunity. And I think this was something that started in our early conversations that, you know, one of the gaps that we often see is just how siloed sometimes these processes are, where I see from the legal side how substitute decision makers often work for me, and Dr. Shulman may see it from more the health side, and Andrew, you see it from the financial side. And you know this is really cool to see some of these forums that bring these conversations together, because yeah, you're absolutely right when you kick it off to say there has been a lot of disconnection in substitute decision making, and primarily it's because there's so much emphasis on the estates. And if you plan your estate in the same way as you would plan your incapacity, there's just different considerations that you have to make. And maybe Dr. Shulman, will I'll pass it to you as well, is we really see, I've had a lot of experience signing these documents in my legal capacity when I was a lawyer. And as Andrew said, I am a lawyer, but I'm the best kind of lawyer because I'm the one that doesn't practice anymore. So that means I get to tell my family members at these family reunions they have to go get independent legal advice now instead of, trying to get the milk through the fence. But we've also seen, especially through the time of the Capacity Clinic, now doing the evaluation side, because I'm also a registered social service worker, and doing the evaluations. This is the time of use, right? So how do you take that incapacity plan and really implement it? And that's where we've seen over the years so many of these disconnections, which is hard to balance, not only for the person making the decisions. They're substitute decision makers, but we're also calling, the decision-making network as well. So I think what the slide here is really talking about, firstly, is we're not talking about estates. Okay, so estates and estate planning, that happens after you die. So this is information that happens to you after you die. So what we're seeing here is the ability to who can make your decisions for you, which are generally divided into two areas. Okay, so there's decisions about your health and decisions about basically non-health, but that's property and banking and that sort of thing. So you see the operation here where the power of attorney, a general power of attorney, the unique part about that is it's not typically effective after you're incapable unless the document specifically says it. The enduring power of attorney, that is typically effective through both now and incapacity. And then the springing power of attorney is really intended to fill that time when you're incapable of making those decisions for yourself. So how we're trying to, and what we've seen a lot of when it comes to the capacity assessment and where the plan isn't, meeting the proper intervention is a lot because I think the biggest myth is people believe they'll be able to tell when they can't make their own decisions. And Dr. Shulman, if you wouldn't mind maybe speaking to just after I finish this, obviously that's not the case. People aren't aware of these things. So then how can you start to proactively understand this as the decision-making network as well, right? And maybe that's a good time to segue into some limitations of yourself and substitute decision making.
Right. So what I would suggest is a very common problem that most people will come across, and we see it all the time in the hospital, we see it in the clinic, is this issue of, is someone able to go home from the hospital, or are they able to remain living alone at home? So this is, I can tell you, I consult on medical and surgical floors at a major hospital, and we have a lot of highly trained and very smart doctors. But when it comes to this question, it's a mystery to people. Now, how do you determine if a person can make a decision that they can go home from the hospital? Because it takes into account two major issues. Number one, to decide on your shelter, it's a personal care decision. And if you're not able to make that decision, a substitute decision maker, particularly if a power of attorney for personal care, could make that decision. But when you go to a shelter, you have to manage it. That's management of property. And so that brings into the idea that here we have a non-health situation, management of financial affairs and property, which is not health, but yet it's implicated in the decision, can someone safely leave the hospital and go home? And that now brings in the issue of, does this person have power of attorney for property, a substitute decision maker for property, which a lot of healthcare people don't know much about. So this is where these two concepts come together in the hospital, in the outpatient clinic, anyone who does geriatrics, this idea about where do you live? It's not simply choosing shelter, it's also managing the property, and the two come together. And that's where the system fails, because people don't plan for the need for substitute decision making. And in a healthcare environment, you're at risk that we can facilitate putting you under the public guardian. So these are big issues.
Thanks. Yeah, from the wealth advisor side, we don't necessarily hear directly about issues coming in on the medical side and with a person's health. We're concerned about their property and their money, and really who can give us direction about what to do with their financial accounts, and really how we advise them what to do. But it is it is, I guess, obvious from what you've said that the ideas of making decisions for your healthcare and your property, they're not necessarily one and the same. And even within your health, there are different topics that you might have to broach and decide whether a person is capable of making a decision on one topic, or with respect to one task. And uh, while decision-making capacity might be task-specific, it's always got a lot of implications on what the person is able to do, and we see a lot of hesitancy around people trying to identify, or even lack of understanding of how to identify incapacity, especially from the professional side. And I'll say, coming through university and training for my CFA designation and as a wealth advisor, we talk a lot about how to manage money, but this idea of, does a person have capacity, and really how do you detect it, and how do you really determine whether somebody's incapable? That's not really a topic that we've got chapter after chapter on in our textbook.
And you know the interesting part, Andrew, if you go to the next slide, there's a lot of times people believe this is situations that only are coming from Hollywood, right? These are like the extraordinary, something that has to be fabricated where it's only in this, 1% of the 1% of people. But it's honestly a lot of common scenarios, common situations, and the way that now the financial world starting to bleed into, the care needs of people, right? And the way that you're able to fund those kind of into your later years is using an asset like a house, and you know a financial advisor, and an arrangement that is able to help achieve your living needs to be well. So here's a scenario that we've often see is there are siblings living across Canada as well. I don't know how much we wanted to get into this, Andrew, but maybe if you don't mind, I'll summarize just very common things that we see. um a lot of times they're joint substitute decision makers. They don't have to be, but the parent is living by themselves in a house, or in the same neighborhood as another family member. If you scroll to the next one, um generally speaking, it a lot of the potential for conflict, um it's so fact dependent, uh but the importance of having somebody monitoring these types of potential vulnerabilities is so crucial. So, um, Dr. Shulman, if we'll go through maybe the rest of the scenario, but when you're going through this, I think what you want to really consider is, I'm not sure everybody on the phone or on the line here, if you're acting as a power of attorney, if you've appointed one yourselves, if you've already been through the process. But when you think of the timing that we're talking about here, right? We're talking about removing somebody's ability to make their own decisions, right? Um, Sometimes that's not the same as supporting decisions, right? So you can have support when you make decisions, but think about this: how you would want somebody to intervene, how you would want your substitute decision maker to behave, and how would you want your advisor to behave. And I think the outcome of this conversation is, talking to Andrew and the team at National Bank so that you can really have clear expectations around these very important issues. I think it's going to help take that plan from, something that you put in paper and make it useful for when that time isn't so clear. So I believe the next few slides are where Dr. Shulman, I'll kick it over to you if you don't mind. But these
Yeah,
are
maybe I'll jump in for just a second. I think you hit
yeah,
the nail on the head. This situation here is a simple one, but it's not out of Hollywood. We've got a parent living on their own, and they like to live independently and probably want to as long as they can. And two children who might see differing sides of the parent, might not have all of the information themselves, and one of them's definitely removed. So there might come a time in Rose's life when she's unable to make decisions for herself. And you can bet that the kids are going to jump in and have an opinion about the best way for the world to proceed. You can bet that the kids probably have their mom's best interests in mind. But Nathan, the questions you asked are really the ones that everybody should be considering. Is in the case that I become incapacitated, how do I want the people around me to try to determine whether I'm incapacitated? And if I am, and if I can't make my own decisions, what decisions do I want them to make on my own behalf? So probably those with the strongest opinions in this case, the two children, aren't really the people that we should be asking what to do. It's really Rose. It's really Rose's wishes, the mother's wishes that we're always concerned about. And when it comes to making decisions when you're incapacitated, you won't necessarily know the time that's going to happen. And so you want everybody to kind of be on the same page. What should we look for? And once it occurs, how do we support Rose so that her wishes kind of play out as she wanted? And it's a lot about giving the substitute decision makers as much information as possible beforehand, so that they know how to address the situation. And as a financial advisor, we might get involved in a lot of different cases. It could be that the mother needs some support as she's getting older, but that doesn't necessarily need a substitute decision maker. Like Nathan said, she might need support in making decisions, but not necessarily need somebody to make them for herself. So maybe Rose gets overwhelmed with the volume of mail that's being sent to her because everybody's asking her for a donation, and spam coming here, there, and wherever. And so Jane wants to be helpful, and Jane wants Rose's financial statements to be sent over to Jane instead of Rose, just to take that burden off of her. Now, painting it as I have, that seems like an amazing thing. Jane wants to help out her mom. But as a financial advisor, I have to start asking myself some questions about why is Jane asking for this now? Is this really in Rose's best interest? And would doing this remove information from Rose's life that she really should have as our client? And of course, if one of the children steps in and says, Rose isn't capable of making her own decisions anymore, or Rose wants to build me a house. Of course, those are questions that can come up and maybe lead to a bit longer of a discussion. And Nathan, thank you for letting me jump in. And I agree. Next couple, we'll hear from Dr. Shulman really about the nature of incapacity.
I just had to agree with you, and I think if I can transition it, it's the next slide hits the nail straight on the head, right? And this is the biggest pain point we've seen. Is we started with this, but if anybody was distracted right now, I would say this is like the key point to pay attention to. And I think the difficulty in the incapacity plans working out like people want to. So don't slam the powers of attorney and your substitute decision-making documents into the vault like you would the will. You don't want somebody to treat you differently after you die. No problem. I don't either, based on, or don't want to treat people differently during my life based on how I leave things after I die. But if you cannot detect your own incapacity, just like Andrew said, then how are you setting the people up around you that are supposed to help out in this situation? How are you going to set them up to succeed? And just like Andrew said, it has to start with yourselves, and then it moves out to, okay, well, who's all else in this network, so that these proactive boundaries can be set. And this is the key opportunity, I think, that doesn't exist, is the 3 areas, the 4 or 5 areas, I don't know how many, I guess there are, but I always think kind of law, financial health in my narrow experience, but that's kind of the key in this. But Dr. Shulman, I think it's always nicer to hear some examples of people, who aren't understanding that limitation and the difficulty that you've seen in the practice. How does somebody know that I should start to step in? What am I?
Yeah. Okay, so I guess first we should well, we should go back to that previous slide for a second because I think I want to emphasize this question or try to answer this question. Why? Why can a person not detect their own incapacity? Like it says there, we cannot, but why not? So that's really a fundamental issue. Why can a person not? Because we see that in major illnesses, major mental or neurological illnesses that impact capacity, that a person often cannot recognize the manifestations of the condition. And this is what it says in the health law. The Supreme Court of Canada has explained this because we're going to talk, whenever we talk about capacity, regardless of the legal test, there's two fundamental abilities built into the criteria of any legal test. This is the ability to understand the relevant information and the ability to appreciate the potential consequences of decisions. So let's just look at those two concepts to begin with. How do we determine someone's ability to understand relevant information? So we know from case law here in Ontario, it's been described similar to the way I think about it. Imagine your brain, it's a box. You got to put information into the box. So that's comprehension. Is the person able to receive and comprehend information? Then you have to store the information in the box, which in health law, it's been described as processing. I call it storage, they call it processing. It's the same idea. And then you have to retrieve the information to use it, which is called in case law, it's called articulating the information. But it's the same idea. So you're receiving, storing, and retrieving information. And there are many conditions that impact the ability to do that. Typically, these are either severe psychotic illnesses or cognitive disorders, neurodegenerative conditions that cause dementia. Okay, so but that could be visible to you because you could see that you've had a discussion with someone and they cannot retain the information. Shortly thereafter, they don't remember what you said, so they cannot retain and articulate it. But the second criteria is much more challenging, the ability to appreciate consequences of a decision. It's an abstract concept. How do we examine that? So we know this also from case law that the Supreme Court of Canada said that there's a concept that you have to be able to recognize the manifestations of your condition and apply the relevant information to yourself. So I need to know something about my own situation, my health, my social situation, my circumstances, what are my limitations, what are my values, and apply that relevant information, about the decision I'm making, to myself, and then I can evaluate. This path might give me that consequence. This choice might give me that consequence, and that's how I'll choose.
Dr.
So that,
Shulman, Dr. Shulman, could you give them an example of when somebody would recognize their own limitations and when somebody couldn't? I think that's
yeah.
helpful to hear like a scenario.
So, for example, in an illness like depression, that may not be so severe, not to the point where they're hospitalized. A person will often say, I'm terribly depressed. I can't work. I can't meet my family's needs. I can't concentrate. I'm having trouble sleeping, trouble eating. But they are recognizing the manifestations of their condition. And so the golden pearl I talk about is who is doing the complaining. In depression, it's a subjective complaint. There's something wrong within me. Then we have the opposite that we see in neurodegenerative illnesses like Alzheimer's disease or in severe schizophrenia, that there's nothing wrong with me. It's outside of me. I have no problem. My daughter is the crazy one. Don't listen to her. I can manage my financial affairs. There's nothing wrong with me. So I always ask, who's doing the complaining? In severe mental illnesses, particularly dementing illnesses, the person with the illness rarely complains. It's the family who's complaining about them, their decline in functional ability. They're not the same as they were before. So that's a little pearl. You could ask yourself, who's doing the complaining? If the family member is complaining about the person and they say they're perfectly fine, that should be a red flag to you that this might be a condition where they can't recognize the manifestations of their condition. And I need to get a proper assessment because I might take instructions from someone who's not making a capable decision.
I I will, at the sake of the timing, probably say I'd go on, but I have a few things I'd like to follow up on with that if we could. And Andrew, I'll summarize this really quickly. This is typically how we see a lot of people using the um, substitute decision making at the moment, is because it's, again, unlike a will, you need this before you pass, right? So, at what point is incapacity or substitute decision making often kicking in if it's not effective immediately? We're talking in cases of incapacity. So we call this the three landmine approach, or it doesn't have to be three, it could be one, it could be five, but just essentially a lot of people are not wanting to step in and make decisions on another person's behalf because they don't have enough information to believe it warrants it. So then they often, for fear of confrontation, for you know perhaps other reasons, they wait until these really out of character, not just that, as Andrew had a slip of memory in here, it's more of a completely bought a car and don't have a driver's license. um that's the point that people will intervene. The network, the service provider, we have seen this a lot more, but the challenge a lot of times I saw as a lawyer is I get one card, I had a small snippet of information, and I didn't know if that amounted to a bigger concern or if that was that slip of the memory type of concern. So the last one is just a lot of people are using capacity assessments. The difficulty is capacity assessments are very intrusive in terms of, we're unbiased. We're really asking a lot of pointed questions, which um, does have its point in the process. But, you know, oftentimes the concern is you're stepping on these landmines in advance. And a lot of people look at the money as one thing that you potentially are going to have the consequence of, but a lot of what the capacity clinic's been retained for, we do these complex capacity assessments where estate litigation's happening. And so many times, just as Andrew said, the family cares about their parent so much, they both have a conversation with the same parent at two different points in time, and one of the two of them was unfortunately talking to an incapable person, and or potentially incapable person, and didn't know it. So the both try to support their parent in the way that they've had the earnest conversation, but it really leads to a lot of family conflict, which I think is the biggest challenge that we're seeing. So uh anyways.
I would just add to that because I was struck by Andrew's comment about the family they're trying to help, and that's one of our biggest challenges is that the literature in elder abuse has shown the most common perpetrator of elder financial abuse is an adult male child of a senior, often living with the senior. So this is our challenge that we have family members who feel entitled, and they may take advantage of the senior. They may abuse the authority of a power of attorney. They may do other fraudulent things. We see a lot of family conflict, and that's the big challenge about trying to promote autonomy. Is that maybe with assisted decision making, the person can still make decisions. At what point do you take over for substitute decision making? is very challenging. Even professionals have challenges trying to advise people. For family members, even more difficult. So this is the environment that we're working in these type of cases.
Yeah, you're definitely highlighting a challenge for professionals, because you want to believe that the children always have the mother's best interests at heart, but at the end of the day, if Rose is my client, Rose is my client, and I have to approach the situation with some sort of skepticism, because I have to protect Rose. Rose is my number one priority, and so then question becomes, is the person incapable, and how do you determine that? So here's some approaches that you've talked about to determine incapacity. But if I'm sitting here, in my mid to late 30s, thinking this might happen to me at some point in time, what are the best practices? How should I set up myself, knowing that I can't determine my incapacity? What do you see out there as the best practices for putting substitute decision makers in a position to make that determination in a time when I would agree with it, which is also a time when I'm not capable of agreeing with it?
I think that leads into the next section perfectly, which is the tips that Andrew gave us all the credit. No way. There's a lot of Andrew too. So just we appreciate the opportunity to speak here today, but we really appreciate again, we don't know the financial side like Andrew and the team does. So we're grateful for the input. Dr. Shulman, I'll comment and you comment, but I'll try to keep these quick because we can try to save some time for questions. I think was also the goal. So Andrew, jump in as needed too. So tip number one, I think, is really essential, everyone. So specifically for property, you do not automatically have a substitute decision maker. So if you have not appointed one, then as it relates to property, you don't have a choice necessarily, because there's going to have to be the court sign off on these appointed substitute decision makers. So having an incapacity plan will get you so far ahead to reduce your risk for becoming a victim of elder abuse, or sorry, not elder abuse, but let's say of a vulnerable person or a vulnerable situation. The timing it takes to do that is extraordinarily long. I mean, I can speak to one, maybe two different provinces. I unfortunately I can't speak specifically to Manitoba, but if it would follow suit, generally speaking, you're a 3 to 6 month process, and it's several tens of thousands of dollars. And if you don't have somebody and people understand that you're incapable, so you can't sign these documents anymore, then that's something you want to really consider being proactive about it. So I think that's message number one. I have had the absolute displeasure of sitting in the hospital trying to help somebody who wanted their dad to sign a power of attorney. He just had a stroke, and the gentleman was crying because his dad let some new occupant live in the house with him because he was lonely. Now the landlord refused to work with the son until he was appointed as the power of attorney, and that's where my assessment was. And unfortunately, when I waited, I tried to give him additional time, and capacity is that time task and situation specific, right? So you can have capacity today, you may not have it tomorrow, but you can regain it in the future. So I tried to give some time to pass to see if this was possible, but the next time I went in, he couldn't even remember his son's name. And I have integrity behind every signature that I've put on a piece of paper, and I couldn't sign that document that day, so he had to go through the court, and that was a terrible situation. I tried to get the answer in advance. If you have an automatic care provider, or sorry, substitute decision maker for care, if you don't appoint one, I didn't get confirmation, but I believe you did. In Ontario, you do under the Healthcare Consent Act. But I didn't get the answer, which was given to me in advance. So I will commit to following up, Andrew, after the webcast to get back to you on that.
Right,
Yeah,
because
appreciate it.
yeah,
Sorry.
here in Ontario, we have the Healthcare Consent Act, and it has a hierarchy. So your appointed attorney for personal care is number one. That supersedes a spouse to make a decision, a healthcare decision for an incapable person, and that creates the three-way marriage, I call it, when a senior appoints a child as attorney for personal care, but they're still married, and now the child's making care decisions, the spouse is not. That could include whether you still live at home or not. So that's why it's so complex. I call it the three-way marriage. And if you have not, so if you have not appointed a power of attorney for personal care, then in Ontario, there's a hierarchy. The spouse would be number one and then children. But I don't know the health law in Manitoba if you have a similar hierarchy. And then ultimately, if there's no family whatsoever, the default is we have the public guardian, which I assume you'd have also in Manitoba. There's never a situation where there's the doctor is making a decision without consent. There's always a subject consent giver. So the final one is the public guardian and trustee here in Ontario.
Dr. Shulman, you made a really good point. I wanted to just hop on from a practical point of view, Andrew. One of the biggest considerations we see, and we would love for this to be like mandatory as like a required element as signing these documents, is if the people you're appointing for health and property are different, consider how are they going to get along and work together, because shelter decisions and that type of thing, there's so many decisions that bleed into each other.
Yeah, I think all of these points come down to the tip number one: have an incapacity plan. If you've discussed this stuff with your substitute decision makers, and they're clear on how you want them to act, you can bring a little bit of control to this situation where it feels like you might not have any. On the other hand, if these things are unclear, if you've got separate decision makers for separate topics and it's not clear how they should interact, and if it's not clear when they should step in and and for what, not only could you be left with these consequences here, no choice, having to wait a really long time for maybe lawyers and courts to opine on your situation, and maybe losing some predictability. But on top of those consequences, you've put your network at a disadvantage. You've created a lot of work for your children or for your substitute decision makers to try to unravel this, and probably to try to unravel it at a point in time when there is a decision to be made. And so we're working in advance and really having these slightly tough discussions well in advance, and continuing to have them as time goes on is really important. And that kind of leads into the next point is you can have an idea of what you want to do in your head, but you kind of have to say it out loud. Very often we might talk to a couple that has a cottage, and they've got fantastic plans about how their kids are going to take over the cottage, and they're all going to get along and swim and play in the sun together. But nobody's really asked the kids. Nobody's asked the kids, do they have an ability to take this on? Do they really want to own a cabin? Do they want to own it jointly? And then so even if you have written it down, you really need to engage the people in your life that are going to be making decisions and involved in making decisions when that time comes. So to make sure that your substitute decision makers, your lawyers, your accountants, and your financial professionals know what the document is, know that they're responsible for certain things, and can really act on your best wishes. Which is one reason, if you're one of our clients, we ask for your wills. We ask to see if you've got a POA, and it's really so we can get a full sense of the world and identify if there are any gaps, if there are any places where you've got an idea of what your wishes are, but you might not have all of the pieces in place to ensure that that gets executed both in your estate once you pass, and even before that, in the case that you're still around but don't have capacity to make your own decisions.
There's such an importance here. So this is not intended to pump up Andrew and the team, but it's going to, because there's a court case that happened. And when people are in advanced dementia, there's of course some difficulties they're likely to have with certain decision making, and the higher the complexity, the higher the decision-making capacity threshold. People like to be satisfied to say that you're capable. So if the person's not capable because their decision-making is being impacted in some type of way, then you can still hold deeply held beliefs. And Dr. Shulman and I just did an assessment where keeping documentation of these deeply held beliefs are so essential to ensuring that your wishes are held up. And if you have that conversation with Andrew, with your team at National Bank here, there's a documentation trail. The nice part about Andrew, he has no benefit in the outcome of those types of decisions. So the relationship that the wealth advisor and their clients have is so valuable for the courts because he's independent. And you don't always talk to your best friend about what's in your will. I don't, at least, what's in my will, or what's, what I'm trying to budget for, aside from, a few shenanigan hockey trips or whatever we try to squeeze in. But it's so important that you get these deeply held beliefs, or you get these beliefs communicated in a way that everybody's on the same page. And Andrew, I think if there was one single tip to come out of this, aside from the incapacity plan, this has got to be number 2. If you can update your network and do everything you can so that your substitute decision maker isn't meeting Andrew and his team for the first time whenever they believe, your family believes you're not able to make decisions, it just really does set everybody into a better place to do their role really well. So that's kind of the difference I've seen, Dr. Shulman, if there's anything to add. But
Yeah, well, I think the deeply held belief, it's really a challenge because a capable person's allowed to change their mind. So now you get someone who's changing a long-standing belief. Now they've decided, no, I'm going to transfer the cottage to the daughter. It's not going to be in the will divided between son and daughter. I'm going to give it to her now. So that change in belief, is that a capable decision? Is it being impacted by a neurocognitive disorder? Is the person now, because of a dementing illness, not able to remember their previous wish? Have they been now influenced unduly so that this child will benefit? How susceptible are they to suggestion? And so that's the big challenge, because these decisions end up being challenged with litigation, and that's where we get asked to either proactively see someone to give an opinion so that it protects the lawyer acting, and there's like an insurance policy in the file to help support a decision, or I may give a verbal opinion that it's not a capable decision that can help guide them how to deal with their client, because otherwise it ends up in litigation, and we sometimes are asked to do retrospective opinions to assist with litigation in the court. These expensive endeavors when the estate is sued over not just the will, but it could be inter vivos gifts before the death of the testator are also part of the lawsuits that we see. So these major financial transactions in late life are often fraught with conflict.
Yeah, so we're hearing planning ahead and making sure that your network's aware of what I'm hearing is not only what you wish, but but some of the reasoning behind what you wish. And I'll say from our end, we do a lot to document our conversations with our clients and what happens through our time with them. And a lot of the person's, deeply held beliefs kind of come out in those conversations, but that information is not necessarily on the power of attorney form that you're signing to give somebody this responsibility. And so hearing that when push comes to shove, a court or medical professional or a lawyer will examine all of this evidence cumulatively, the documentation that's in place and any evidence that comes up leading up to the incapacity event, to really get a proper understanding of the situation and what the person might be able to do and might not be able to do. And so the more this stuff is out in the open, the easier it is to do that. Now, of course, like Nathan said, you don't talk to your buddy about your will, which is why it's really helpful to have these professionals in your life that you can share these details with, so that because you probably don't talk to your buddy about what's in your bank account either. But to make sure that folks are aware, and just flipping to the next slide for a half second, just to show how complicated a person's network can be. If you imagine the case that not only would your financial advisor and your accountant and your lawyer want to know about these documents, but imagine that you give gifts frequently to a bursary, and all of a sudden you're incapable and you forget, or a payment isn't made one time, and all of a sudden the bursary is in the dark about your situation and unsure who they can talk to. And they might come to a wealth advisor and say, hey, I didn't get the $1,000 donation. Can you send it over? And we might just have to say, oh, hold on a second, there's a bit of a trickier situation here. And then there's Rose, who's has this deeply held belief that she wants to continue to make donations to a charitable cause through her life as she's able to, and those stop. And so there's a wish that just that doesn't get executed on just because the network's not aware. So it can touch lots of areas in your life, and people like your lawyer and your financial advisor can definitely play a role in helping to make sure that those conversations can happen and to help facilitate them also.
Yeah, if I could just add, maybe my final medical comment, I think, Andrew, you hit such an important point, is the reasoning behind a decision. Many of the cases that we see with the retrospective evaluations from litigation, it's the fiduciary advising, usually it's a lawyer, that they not documented reasons behind a decision, and it's often just closed-ended questions, yes or no. But that's not reflective of the decision-making process. And we also have seen several cases where we know that the senior was severely deaf, and there's no documentation that hearing was assisted, that they were wearing hearing aids, that hearing aids work. As a geriatric psychiatrist, I don't carry a stethoscope. I carry a pocket talker. A pocket talker is an amplifier with headphones. I put it on the patient, and I talk into the microphone. This is much more important to me in geriatrics than a stethoscope. So the reasoning to be documented, and this goes to this ability to appreciate, because we talked about recognizing the manifestations of a condition, but the other aspects of appreciation are justifying your choice and a realistic appraisal of an outcome. Is it irrational reasoning? Is it affected by delusional thoughts? How do I justify how I made that choice? If that can be documented and they can understand what you've told them and maybe repeat it back to you and show that they're able to learn and remember it, then you're going to be very confident that it's a completely capable decision. And you can document that, and you may not need a consultant like myself to support you. But if you haven't done that, that's where I see in the cases that I'm asked to consult in litigation, these things have not been met, no one knows, and then medical experts comes into play to try and give further advice if the person would have been able to understand, able to appreciate based on their condition and healthcare problems.
I would probably say it, Andrew, just because of the time, if I could possibly commandeer something for you. Just go to, if you could go to the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. Um, I think this is really important, the witnesses to it. It does speak to, there are different elements of what Dr. Shulman is saying you have to understand and appreciate about each of these. Not every person who's a witness is built the exact same way. So just like Andrew said, having professionals assist you does have value in those situations, especially say one person has to act the same way as the next, but something to consider. I just wanted to get to the next 2 points, because the next one, establishing the incapacity boundaries. I'm going to talk about this one very, very briefly, but if it's cool, we could just finish on the next slide right in 1 second. This is something for your incapacity plan to take away. So once again, if you can think of when you would want somebody to investigate your own incapacity, right? So when Dr. Shulman's saying, have a realistic appraisal of outcomes, the non-geriatric psychiatrist word for me is, are they missing key benefits or key risks? Things they would usually get, and I think, what information would you expect that your substitute decision maker, what conversation could they have with Andrew, right? Or his team, so they could get more information, or your trusted contact. So these are really important to sit down with the team. But the final one is probably where, if we had 1 minute left, I would just finish with, look for the changes. This is like, as Dr. Shulman said, the pearl. If you see a change in someone, there could be an underlying cause. Doesn't mean there is, it just means there can be. So if you had to, one thing that I'm really passionate about is, a lot of people are being deemed incapable because they don't know what's in their bank account. But if you knew that person over time, they might not have ever known what's in their bank account. That's not the role they played in the relationship. So if that financial managing spouse dies and the one that doesn't manage the finances lives on, just because she doesn't know what's in her bank account doesn't mean that she still can't manage certain parts of her finances working with professionals. And I think that's the nugget I would give for everybody. Dr. Schulman, if there's anything that you want to say on this one, but we gotta.
No,
Yeah, and I think this is my key takeaway too, that seeing how things change over time, and how appreciation and understanding plays into a person's decision making might not be evident in one decision. Like Nathan was saying, a person might have capacity and then not have capacity, and then have capacity again later. We as professionals, we see you over the course of your lifetime, and we and the people around you are have the perspective. We are not you, but we have the perspective to see how you might change over time, and to maybe pick up on changes that you might not notice yourself. And I can say, as a wealth advisor, where we have hopefully long-term relationships with all of our clients, we can notice these sorts of changes. And it puts us in a situation where we might have to start asking some questions, and you might experience this with us, with me, and with Paul, and with Eric at some point during our relationship. That if we start to notice a change in you, we might ask some questions. They're not meant to be demeaning, and to understand, to identify if you can understand us, understand complex material. We're just trying to assess what can you understand, and what can you appreciate. It can be tricky for us because we're dealing with sometimes complex financial topics. So to differentiate, do they understand the math of it, between do they understand the risks, the rewards, the complications it can add to their life, it can be challenging. So appreciate it. These are 5 fantastic tips. Dr. Shulman and Nathan, thank you so much for joining us. I think we were talking before this presentation started that we maybe want to try to keep it to 30 minutes, and I was optimistic, but that one kind of went out the window. Nevertheless, an incredibly engaging conversation. We really appreciate hearing your perspectives. And we've got a lawyer and a doctor and a financial professional in the room. This could have really easily turned into a really bad joke, but we've covered a lot of challenging material with two fantastic resources in Canada, in Dr. Shulman and Nathan. If you want to see more of the education that they put out, check out their website, or you can Google Capacity Clinic. You can also have a look at the POA registry, which is helping to keep track of your POA designations and substitute decision makers, and trying to ease some of that burden in keeping track of who can make decisions, notifying and identifying the documents that they might need. And of course, Paul and Eric and Dave and I are always here to continue the conversation if you need. If you got to track us down on our website, you can Google Christianson Wealth Advisors, and you should find us pretty easily. That was all for me. Nathan or Dr. Shulman, any closing points?
No, I think have the conversation. I just have to continue to encourage people. The more you have that conversation, the less it will cost in the future, and I don't mean in dollars alone. So this has been amazing, and we're really grateful that everybody was here today.
Thank you for joining us. As always, we love connecting with new people. So if you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or to one of the guests. Take care.